Hey folks, welcome to Phil 107 Asian Philosophy. In this short video here, what I want to do, as the title suggests, is talk a little bit about what philosophy is and then how that relates to knowledge and wisdom. Some of you I know have taken this class before, will have taken this class before. It's often taken by pre-philosophy students who have already decided they like philosophy. But because it's listed on the CalGETC list where you don't need any prerequisites, and it meets that requirement, there will be some of you who haven't taken philosophy before and just maybe think, hey, that sounds interesting. I don't know much about, Asia, or philosophy. Maybe I'll learn. And that's fine too. So you're all welcome, whatever your background. That said, for those of you who have taken philosophy before, this will be more of a refresher. And for those of you who haven't, this should give you a brief intro to what philosophy is really all about. Okay, so that being said, let me jump right into it. Philosophy is a Greek word that comes from ancient Greece. You've probably heard of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, at least in the culture, they're still around. And the word philosophy means love of wisdom. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. And so right away you can see that wisdom is in the name, right? What is wisdom and what is knowledge? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to say just a little bit more about philosophy per se, because philosophy is usually divided into the two major aspects of the world, not aspects, but regions of the world. That it's more messy than that, but just for simplicity, we often divide it up by the Western world and the Eastern world, right? In Espanol, el mundo occidental y el mundo oriental. So in the Western world, the philosophy typically is said to have started in the ancient Greek culture that spread forward and spread into and influenced Christianity and Islam and many philosophies of Europe and the Middle East. In the Eastern world, philosophy is usually said to have started in ancient China and spread forth to India and the Pacific Islands and Japan and so forth. And although there are lots of different cultural norms in all of these regions, East and West, there are similar threads that we can grab and find in each of these threads. So what philosophy typically studies is sort of a simple way to put it, is that philosophy is the study, the deep analysis of ideas relating to knowledge, reality, and values. And so, ideas related to knowledge, philosophers call epistemology. Epistemological means something knowledge related. If we're talking about how students learn, that's epistemological, that's about epistemology. If we're talking about the scientific method, right, that's a method of generating knowledge. If we're talking about even what you gain from a spiritual experience, that's more than that, but that's also a certain type of immediate direct knowledge, right? Personal experiences are a kind of knowledge, lived experience, as it's often discussed today. Metaphysics is the part of philosophy. Sometimes we call them the branches of philosophy. Metaphysics is the branch or part of philosophy that deals with reality. So that has to do with things like, does God exist? What exists? That's what metaphysics is about. Is there a God? Do we have free will? Did the Big Bang start everything? And so, as you can see, even with that question, metaphysics kind of touches epistemology a bit, because science, although science is focused on epistemology, it answers some questions about metaphysics. Science tells us this is what happened, this is what exists. And then the last branch of philosophy that's a little more usually more related to opinion, although even that's debatable, which you can talk about in an ethics class, but I'll just skip over that for now. The last branch of philosophy is sometimes called axiology or value theory. And you can see from that last one that that has to do with values and norms, often morality, art, what is beautiful, what is not, how do we even determine that? And so, value theory is, again, questions about morality. How do I know what the right thing to do is? How should I behave? What kind of character should I have? Does it even matter? Is it wrong to steal? Is it wrong to kill? Is abortion right or wrong? These are all questions you ask in value theory. So philosophy is typically divided, whether it's East or West. Philosophy will touch on those three categories in one way or another. Now, what's interesting about the distinction between East and West is that they have touched on them in different ways. So to just take one example, a metaphysical idea of God in the Western world is often called monotheism, right? The idea that there's a singular being or God that created the universe. And the Judeo-Christian religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all basically take a stand on that, saying that God is more of a being. Yes, he may be partly, Jesus may be an example of God on earth, but fundamentally God is one thing. Or the Trinity in Catholicism, most Catholics will say, yes, God is tripartite, but fundamentally he's one. In Islam, with Allah, yes, Allah is the messenger of God, but God is still one, right? So that's the idea of metaphysics in the Western world. But as we're going to see in this class in the East, they have seen God more from a pantheistic point of view, right? Pan means all. It's like kind of like pansexual, all. Pantheism means God is more of a force or a something in nature, or even nature itself. And so that's one of the ways we're going to have to transform our thinking, because most people here will have grown up in a Western context and understood God. And not just, I'm just using one example. We could talk about epistemology and values as well from East and West, and we will. But just to give you kind of a heads up, when we're talking about philosophy in this class, we're going to look at a different way of understanding those metaphysical ideas, and especially with respect to Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and Confucianism, which are the core religions we're going to study, but we'll also study some other ideas as well. Okay, so that gives you an overview of what philosophy is. Now I want to talk a little bit about knowledge and wisdom, right? So wisdom is notoriously hard to quantify. We often have people in our lives that we consider wise, but it's sort of hard to put into words exactly why it is, right? And if you start to analyze it and start to write down, this is what wisdom is, you sort of lose something of what wisdom, because wisdom is more on the fly. Wisdom is more something that you have in the moment. People kind of have it or they don't. We often associate it with age, with a person who's older often has more wisdom, though that's not necessarily the case. And as we'll see throughout the history of Eastern thought in particular, there are many young people who have been seen as wise beyond their age. The Buddha himself, depending on the story you look at, but most stories, he was pretty young, late 20s, early 30s, when he became the Buddha. His real name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was a prince who became enlightened, and we'll talk about that. But wisdom is something beyond knowledge, right? Knowledge may be part of wisdom, but wisdom is something more intangible. And so that's something we'll be talking about a lot in this class, especially with respect to people who may have a higher spiritual development. Knowledge is a little more clear-cut, isn't it? It can be very complicated too, don't get me wrong. Scientific theories sometimes take years and years and years to fully prove that something is knowledge. On the other hand, the way knowledge is often described, it's often defined as justified true belief, right? So, for instance, I could say, I know that I have a cup of coffee over here, right? I know that I have a cup of coffee over here. Well, what describes that knowledge? Well, it's a justified belief because I can see it with my eyes, right? I have some evidence of it. I can feel it with my hand. Here's my coffee cup. And it's true because the cup is actually here. As far as I know, I'm not hallucinating. I'm not on magic mushrooms. By the way, we'll talk about psilocybin and magic mushrooms later in the class because they were a key aspect of early Hinduism. But right now, I'm not on that. I'm perfectly sober, aside from the little bit of coffee I had. So I know that it's here, and I believe that it's here. I believe that I have this here, right? So it's justified. It's a belief I have, and it's true. So knowledge is typically that way. And if you look at other scientific ideas that started as theories, that started as beliefs with some evidence, and over time acquired more evidence, they became knowledge. You could see evolution that way, or the theory of gravity that way, right? They started out with theories from people hundreds of years ago that over time there was just all this triangulated evidence that led us to say, okay, now we know that. Now, yes, knowledge can get more complicated when it mixes with morality and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into those nuances, although I will say that in my logic and critical thinking class, or any logic and critical thinking class, you don't have to take it with me, you will talk about those nuances of what knowledge really is. But anyways, that's an overview. In this class, we're going to talk about philosophy more from the Eastern perspective. Obviously, it's Asian philosophy. We're going to talk about some knowledge. We're going to look at historians and other philosophers who have looked at the beliefs and philosophies of ancient people, and they have to base what they're saying on the knowledge of archaeologists and anthropologists. So knowledge is a big part of this class. But a big part of it, and I hope what you take away from the class, is a wisdom, right? Because knowledge alone, all the books you see behind me, those alone can't make you wise. But reading them and applying their lessons and learning from them, that can make you wise. And so, really, what we hope, me and other people in the philosophy department hope from this class is that you learn some things, but you also develop some level of wisdom.